And so in exchange for getting away with not paying them cash, they'll give them something else that they have available, which is ownership.
Yeah.
That's the only reason why that exists. And anyone that wants to believe differently is fucking fooling themselves.
Yeah. So one of the things that I think people really don't understand is that because I've gotten a lot of comments from people that are like, you're a slave driver, you're a bootlicker, all these fucking comments, right? Like, hey, you know, you wouldn't have anything if it wasn't for your employees and all that kind of stuff. Okay, fine, fair enough. But I get a lot of comments where it's like people feel that the employees deserve like a piece of everything, and I thoroughly disagree. And the reason why I thoroughly disagree is because, and now I'm not saying they don't deserve a piece in the performance of things. That's not what I'm saying. I feel like some people, a lot of people feel like they deserve a piece of ownership. And I thoroughly disagree because they weren't the ones that put up the risk. They weren't the ones that put up the capital. They weren't the ones, you know, all the sleepless nights. They weren't the ones that created all of the, you know, the legal structures. They weren't the ones that set everything up. They weren't the ones that took all of that. Yeah. If you want a piece of it, you need to share in that risk. You need to share in that capital. You need to share in those, in all of those stressors.
Yeah. I think a lot of people don't realize, like, when it comes to equity-based pay, because I feel like a lot of these comments are probably coming from people that aren't on equity-based pay.
No, of course not.
Pay packages.
Yeah, no, they're
but
not.
Having talked to people that are on equity-based pay packages, like, it's not like these companies are paying their employees in the form of equity because they feel like the employees just deserve it and it feels good and whatever. They're strictly doing it because they don't have enough cash to cover the employees that they need to be able to grow. And so in exchange for getting away with not paying them cash, they'll give them something else that they have available, which is ownership.
Yeah.
That's the only reason why that exists. And anyone that wants to believe differently is fucking fooling themselves.
Yeah.
Right? It's strictly only, like, let's say hypothetically, Decent Nutrition was just really short on cash. You've also been profitable for so long, but a lot of companies out there are not profitable. Let's say they're in a high growth, high revenue growth, but non-profitable stage, like Uber or any of these other tech companies for years and years and years of not being profitable. How much cash can you really borrow from the bank to be able to pay employees to be able to grow your business as fast as you can?
Yeah.
Like, it's fucking limited.
Yeah, people get stuck.
So you'll get a valuation of your company that'll determine the based on the number of shares outstanding, what the value of each share is, and then you have essentially like a tiered based equity system over the years where it's like, hey, any founders or initial people will be getting kind of like a certain ratio. Any people coming in at this time at like a management level will get this ratio, all the way down to like your late joiners, lower level employees are getting a much smaller kind of like ratio of kind of like per hour to each dollar in equity. Very common structure in venture capital and equity-based pay things. Yeah. It's like, but if a company is profitable and growing very quickly, like, that's not something that people just are by default. I mean, you and I have talked about this. Like, I've told you, I'm like, listen, I recognize that I can go my entire career and I have zero expectation of any sort of form of ownership of the company, or like that there'll be any future equity pay, or even like you sell the company. If you don't give me $1, I'm not going to be like, oh, I deserved it, like whatever. It's like, no, it's your fucking company. I'm also showing you what I essentially feel like that we can kind of do in terms of the performance of the company and all that kind of stuff. But when it comes to like any sort of like ownership, it's like no, like, listen, anything that if you potentially sell and you want to give a gift or whatever to anyone that you think is deserving, fine. But I think that anyone that thinks otherwise, I think they're just delusional, or they have that sense of entitlement that just isn't backed by anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure. But it's a lot more prevalent than you'd think.
Yes,
it really is.
No, I recognize that.
Yeah,
yeah, and I feel like you see in. I mean, I think tech companies are a good example to kind of look at when it comes to their strategy and how they compensate people, because you do have companies like, let's say, Facebook that just give out fucking equity left and right, and they'll have performance packages for, like, let's say an upper level engineer making $500,000 a year, and the person's base pay is maybe $100,000 or less of their overall compensation, and they're getting like $400K plus of equity, right? And especially in the early stages of Facebook, that was very, very common. And then you have other tech companies that are very heavy on equity-based pay, to the point where this founder and CEO is only owning like 18% of it because they've diluted their shares so much, or they sold, not diluted, they've sold off their shares so much. Whereas you have other companies like Netflix. Netflix is notorious to be like, no, we're not giving fucking anyone equity. We'll pay our engineers $900,000, but we're going to have the best engineers in the entire fucking world. If you ever stop performing, we're getting rid of you immediately, and we'll replace you with another best engineer in the world. But no one is ever getting fucking equity.
Interesting.
Right. So it's just also interesting to see how tech companies approach their different compensation packages, depending on kind of like one, what they have available, but also a lot of the belief systems of the founders, right? If the founders want to keep it private or kind of centralized to not diluting their ownership shares, then yeah, like in order to compete, they're either going to have to pay high amounts of cash, or they're going to be able to pay higher amounts of equity in like those high growth tech companies.
And this isn't even remotely what I'm talking about, what you see coming in on the comments, right?
No,
this is so fucking low level people that
100%.
that they just don't, they truly don't understand how business works, right? They truly feel that, that a lower level employee shares in the risk of the ownership. Yeah. And it's that's like absolutely so delusional to me. It's unreal. And then when I ask people, how do you even, what's your basis for that? What's your theory for that? They're basically like, well, you could fire them. And I'm like,
yeah, but that only means that the extent of their risk is the time that they've invested.
Exactly.
That's it.
That's what I'm saying. And and then that's when they come back and say, well, they've invested the time and this and that. And I'm like, but they were compensated for that time. So there's no risk.
Yeah.
And there would be no risk if they added value, continuously added value, continuously performed.
Yeah.
There's no risk there. The ownership takes on all the risk.
Yeah.
All of the risk. That's why I'm saying when these people make these arguments, they're futile. Yeah. There's no water being held in that argument whatsoever because they share in zero risk. They haven't contributed any kind of capital to make this happen. Fucking zero. They haven't, there's no sleepless nights. There's none of that kind of stuff.
Or like literal financial risk that you have of you
literally being ruined.
Yes.
Literally fucking ruined.
Yeah. I mean, especially like growing in the early stages, like losing your house, losing your car, losing like this and that, and not just because you lose a job, it's that you have like everything is based on the outcome of the business.
Yeah,
you're all in on it.
Yeah, of course. I gave up a decade of my life.
Yeah.
I didn't have 20s. So my 20s didn't exist for me. So give me 10 years of your life. Let me add it onto mine. And then you can maybe have a sliver of it because that's all it is. There's so many other things.
Mm-hmm.